We're exciting. All right.
Okay.
Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabados of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service, jbiztechvalley.com, and as you can see here, columnist for the Jewish Press.
I have a column there called Albany Beat, where I talk about how government relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't, as the case may be.
All right.
But speaking of government,
Yeah,
we
right.
have one of the foremost government watchdogs in the Capitol, Blair Horner. He's the executive director of the New York Public Interest Research Group. So welcome to the Jewish View.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
It's
Blair,
great for you to
very
be
good.
here. Now, I always remember when I was in college that NYPIRG, New York Public Interest Research Group, was always a student, always had an affinity with students.
Want me to describe it?
Go ahead.
Well, NYPIRG is a not-for-profit, nonpartisan organization. And what makes us unique is our board of directors are all college and university students elected from the schools that have chosen to have a NYPIRG chapter there. And so I report to a college student board of directors. The good news in that is that they hold my feet to the fire because they're all very idealistic and not cynical. The downside is I don't have the normal board of deep-pocketed donors that can help make the trains run on time as the executive director. But it's great. And so part of our mission is to give college students an experience in civics that they wouldn't get in a classroom. Sort of a lab, if you look at it that way.
And did you start off with NYPIRG while you were in college? Or?
Well, sort of. I mean, I got a job working with NYPIRG in a summer job. It was a seasonal job doing campaign work. And when I was in graduate school at the State University at Stony Brook, I was involved in NYPIRG there. So it's sort of what I guess.
Where'd you go to undergrad?
Between Nassau Community College and SUNY Stony Brook. And I was in a graduate program.
You know, there's something interesting, because you say students are involved, and that's nice, but obviously it's a very small number of students. Just generally, the American people do need a good class in civics. I'm not just a group of people. Again, probably you know more than I do, I'm sure, that is the civics, but half the people don't know who the vice president is, or half the American people don't even vote.
70% of New Yorkers didn't vote in the last governor's election.
I didn't know that.
It's ridiculous at a certain level. It's crazy, sort of. But,
so it's nice that people are involved, but maybe my problem is just how to get more people concerned.
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a legitimate angle to it. I mean, we try to do what I was describing before, and Mark asked me the question about NYPIRG's roots. We also have a community component where we go talk to people at the doors. And we have probably another 90,000 New Yorkers who are just community members, and we email them information and try to keep them in the loop. But still a drop in the bucket in a state of 20 million in terms of getting the word out. But we try to get on shows like this to get the word out to other people.
Well, now you have millions of people watching you over here on the Jewish View. All right.
So what's your budget at NYPIRG?
It's roughly $5 million.
Roughly.
And we have, it's a little bit more than that.
If it's not for, where are you getting the money from?
If you looked at it as a pie chart, about half of it comes from small donations from these 90,000 people that I mentioned before. The remaining half is probably split, where half of it comes from the colleges and universities to pay to have NYPIRG staff person on their campus, and we run internship programs and civics projects.
So it's like a student activity fee?
It's a portion of that, that's right. And then the remainder are foundation grants, or we have a fuel buying cooperative where people can get a discount on home heating oil if they need it through us if they're a member. So that's pretty much where there's no government money. There's no corporate money or lobbying money.
Isn't there a controversy on the campus of why should my student activity fee go for NYPIRG when I don't really support NYPIRG? Or
I mean, the way it works at the vast majority of the schools, and the way it should work, is that those students should be able to get a refund if they don't want to. We're perfectly fine with that. That to us would make perfect sense. That's the way it is. I mean, the students vote for whether or not they want to have NYPIRG on their campus. And in the same way as you vote for elected officials, you don't necessarily like everything they do. You still have to pay your taxes.
That's right.
But in our case, The vast majority of the schools, you can get a refund, and we think that's appropriate.
What would be the reason why people wouldn't want NYPIRG?
Because their ideals are not the ideals of what NYPIRG is pushing when they lobby at the Capitol.
So, for example, I'll give you an
Right,
example.
good.
So, we worked very hard to, with a coalition of other groups, to ban smoking in public places and workplaces. So there are people that don't agree with that, right? In the older adult world and in the younger adult world that don't agree with that. So Mark's point would be then that the smokers on a college campus may object philosophically to the notion of regulating cigarette smoking in public places, and they may not agree with that, and why should they pay for it?
Yeah, but so you're a watchdog and you have your own position.
Yes.
It's not like you're just,
That's
hey,
right.
you're stealing, like Mark always tries telling us how many tens, unfortunately, of senators, assemblymen are felons.
That's right. That's right. And we have perspectives on what should be done to fix that, that situation where essentially in Albany, I mean, it's unbelievable over the last 15 years, there have been 41 elected officials that have gotten into trouble.
And here's the list.
And even a longer list if you go back further in time.
Right.
And it's, it's sort of the political equivalent of a crime wave, where you have the leading elected officials, the former Senate Majority Leader, the former Deputy Senate Majority Leader, the former Speaker, all convicted of crimes in the past
Malcolm
six
Smith,
months.
John Sampson, who were former majority
That's
leaders
right.
in the Senate.
We've had a comptroller go to prison in the last
Alan
5 years.
Henderson.
We've had a governor that had to resign for unethical behavior. We had another former governor who had to pay a penalty for lying under oath. I mean, it really is sort of mind-boggling when you think about it. And so we do what we can to sort of react to that, and we do what we can to advance policy solutions to sort of deal with at least the parts of that you can deal with. I mean, obviously you're dealing with humans, as you well know. Humans are on a bell curve. There's the angels, the devils, and all the rest of us. And what you try to do is pass laws so the people in the rest of us behave, and you catch the bad guys.
So when it comes to the failings of these people, I mean, does it put a stain on the entire legislature, let's say, or the entire government?
Yeah.
Because I know that I spoke to one former assemblyman who said he got out because he felt he was being painted with a broad brush, and he didn't want to be in this type of an environment or associated with these people.
That's certainly his right not to do that. I mean, as the rabbi mentioned earlier, large percentages of the country don't vote. This is one of the reasons why. They're just disgusted by what they see. Even the stuff that's legal, sort of the gridlock and toxic partisan environment that elected officials sort of behave in, is a turnoff to average people who pay taxes. And they're like, we send you to the Capitol to fix problems, not to play games all day. And so it's understandable, and so it is a stain. For those legislators, though, and the vast majority of whom are honest, hardworking, want to do the right thing, they get elected to Albany, though, to solve problems. And if they're not solving the problem, they should get out of office, no matter how honest they are.
Because they're a part of the problem.
Well, if they're not fixing it, they become
right.
part of the problem. And that's, I think, where the sort of the blame game, I mean, they should feel the moral and ethical and responsibilities and civic responsibilities to fix things, if they can. Not all problems can be fixed,
Can you
certainly by the government.
legislate ethics, though?
You can legislate what's right and wrong and punish wrongdoing. Can you legislate that people behave? Well, you can tell them if they don't, they're going to be punished. And you can have clear rules for what's right and wrong. And if you don't do that, if you have muddied sort of interpretations and you have ineffective watchdogs, what you're doing is encouraging people to game the system, and we've seen too much of that.
But how much minutia do you have to get into to really, really resolve this issue of I always say legislative ethics is an oxymoron.
Well, by the way, it's not just the legislative branch.
No. We talked about the
executive branch,
executive branch,
judicial
yeah.
branch has had its problems too.
Right. Saul Walker had his problems.
I mean, what you need is independent enforcement more than anything else. And New York has never had that, and that's why all of these most recent scandals, particularly the big fish, have been the result of federal prosecutors who are independent of the so hopefully, of the political pressure in New York
That's why I
State.
wanted to really ask when, because we say we have the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader, and it's in federal court. And I always, well, it's a New York State issue. Why is it a federal
Well,
court?
these could be federal crimes, and that's what the U.S. Attorney alleged, and that's what they were convicted of, basically theft of honest service, so that you as a public official have a responsibility to give an honest service on behalf of your constituents, and when you're using your public office for private gain, in those two circumstances, then that is illegal, and the jury's convicted both. I mean, it's similar to the Senator Bruno case, who was a local boy, whose case was ultimately overturned on appeal, but the same argument is that basically you're using your public office for private gain, and that ain't right. And so in these cases, you run afoul of federal laws if you're not careful. But the state laws, and you're right, there are state violations here, but the state watchdogs have been nowhere. And if you believe everything that you came out in the court cases, these issues have been hanging around for decades. So where were the state watchdogs, right? We pay millions of dollars for these guys. Where are they? And so it has to come that one U.S. attorney just happens to make this a crusade. And because he's done that, he's created a political earthquake at the state capitol.
And is Preet Bharara your hero now?
I don't have heroes.
Do you have
I may have a hero after this conversation,
do you have
but I don't have one
pictures
now.
of him in your office
No,
saying
no, we
that
don't.
because I mean he's doing what you would have hoped the state of
Yes.
watchdogs
So
would have
that
done.
would be your job, because Mark's introduced you as the watchdog over here, but you wouldn't get involved in those kind of.
Well, we've done research that have helped uncover things that have been wrong. So I mentioned before about the smoking in public places. We looked very hard and worked to find evidence of tobacco giant Philip Morris giving illegal gifts to state lawmakers about 15 years ago now. And that contributed to it. So we try to do research to uncover stuff, but we don't have subpoena power, the police power.
No.
We're just a not-for-profit that runs around and tries to do the right thing as best as we see it.
So let me ask you, there's been talk about the current governor, Andrew Cuomo, having, on the verge or on the cusp of falling into Preet's web of issues of government irresponsibility. So do you, I mean, you worked for Andrew Cuomo when he was Attorney General.
That's right.
For a brief period. I mean, is he the type of person that would normally seek out a way to do something that's not
Well, I'm
legal?
certainly in no position to sort of comment on what someone's motivations or interests or predispositions are, right? I never saw anything like that, or I would have quit on the spot. But I mean, I know that there's been a lot of discussion about it, and there's been some media reports about it that the U.S. Attorney is looking into some of the states' economic development programs in the way that the governor unceremoniously dumped his independent ethics commission as part of a deal with the legislature.
And the Buffalo Billions issue.
Right, well, that's the economic development.
Right.
But whether or not any of those rise to the level of a crime, who knows, right? I mean, the problem the governor has is all of the smoke that's been generated by the convictions of some of his colleagues, right, the former Senate Majority Leader and the former Speaker of the Assembly, to some extent taint him by association. Whether or not the U.S. Attorney has anything that was done illegal or not, I have no idea. And I think anyone who speculates on it just feeds the frenzy. The U.S. Attorney knows what he knows. None of us do. And it would be wrong for him to be telling anyone before he acted, if he were to act.
Back to the legislature for a minute. If the Speaker Silver apparently did what he thought was correct under the Assembly ethics laws, rules, regulations, so he thought he was doing the right thing. Now you come along and you have the federal government saying, oh no, those Assembly rules, regulations, they don't meet federal standards, and now I got you. Okay? It's sort of what happened with Senator Bruno. Senator Bruno said, oh, I asked counsel if this was legal, buying a horse or whatever.
He asked his employees if what he was doing was all right, right? I mean, the same thing with Silver. The Legislative Ethics Commission, which rules on what's right and wrong and gives guidance to members of the legislative branch, They're hired by the legislative leaders, right? So what underling is going to tell their boss that what they're doing is wrong?
Because
this is
it
why
helps-
you need,
because
no, but
it's-
this is why you need independent oversight. We don't have the people we don't have, you don't hire the police force from your own business, right? We have an independent police force because they're supposed to enforce the laws. That's what we don't have in New York. And you can't rely on people that you're involved in hiring to give you the opinion that you should hear. They're probably going to give you the opinion they think you want to hear. And that can lead to trouble.
But if you're such a good friend of, let's say, a speaker of the assembly, and he appoints you into the position of chair of the ethics committee, and you're going ahead and looking at these policies, I mean, aren't you being a better friend by saying, no, you shouldn't be going down this road,
Again,
and this is wrong? And I mean, I would think that would be
what you're saying
a
is
better
reasonable.
you know.
And that's why maybe you should be the head of the Legislative Ethics Commission, right? All we know are the facts. The facts are that the U.S. Attorney brought federal action against the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader for violating the law. They've been convicted. Right? It's not like we're just guessing.
Right.
They've both been convicted by a jury of their peers. And so what they did obviously is wrong. And I think the message should be to all elected officials that if you're going to engage in outside business activities on your own behalf or on your son's behalf, you should be very, very careful about mixing that up with your role for public office. Because the message is pretty clear. If you're using your public office for private gain, you could be running afoul of the law. Most legislators don't have that problem. Most of them don't have outside jobs. Most of them, if they do have an outside job, have a little one, adjunct at some school. They don't get a lot of money. There's a very small number that actually have big outside employment. Those are the ones that are going to have to be careful. Those are the ones who are going to get scrutiny, and those are the ones who deserve the scrutiny, frankly, because if you're using your public office for private gain, we think that's a no-no and should be prohibited, and perhaps the U.S. Attorney's actions will make that happen.
well,
I mean, the other hand, I mean, I would say it's almost impossible now. If, let's say, for example, you're a speaker, and getting without names,
Right.
They put his name on a law firm. It just, you'd have to just say you can't get any outside income. I
Right.
don't see how, unless you want to be a garbage man or something like that on your off hours,
Well, I mean,
working a
and
7-Eleven.
What the Congress has is the rule that we think Albany should have. The Congress says you are allowed to have outside income, but it can't be more than 15% of the highest salary in the congressional branch, around $25,000. You can't have more than that. You can't get more than that. And you can't have a job where you have a fiduciary responsibility to your client. In other words, you have to put your client's interests ahead of your own, because that's an inherent conflict of interest. Right. How can you have a fiduciary responsibility to a person as a lawyer, as an accountant, while you're an elected official and your fiduciary responsibility is supposed to be to the public? What happens when those are in conflict?
Right.
So the Congress says you can't have those jobs. And if you have other jobs, garbage man, pharmacist, adjunct professor, it can't be more than 25 grand. So and where did that come from? It came out of Watergate, last major scandal. Makes perfect sense that would be the paradigm for New York, because you know how it's going to play out. They've had 35 years experience on what the rules are going to look like, and so you just adopt that. That's what we think should happen in New York.
And
That's what we're pushing for.
And
Yeah,
the Skelos Silver convictions was our Watergate moment here in New York. I mean,
It's been one of many Watergate moments. I mean, the thing that's sort of mind-blowing is I don't know where the tipping point is, right? How many of these scandals have to occur before something happens? We'll see.
But it's
So,
the Capitol, though. It's the legislators are going to have to make that kind of law
right.
like the Capitol. So it's like, again, like you say, you're policing yourself. And
Right. I mean, what Mark's point was, as well, is that, how can you ask the people who win by the rules of the game to change the rules of the game, right? It is a lot to ask. I'm sympathetic to that. On the other hand, what are you going to do, right? The public is, all the polls tell you they're outraged by what they see in Albany. There are some members that have talked to you that say they don't want to do it anymore because it's guilt by association. Well, guess what? Fix it. It's pretty simple.
Right.
Don't start whining and complaining and, I can't do it. So get some bills passed. Let's make this place better.
So-
we'll never make it perfect as long as there are humans involved. I mean, democracy is a work in progress. As long as we have humans involved, there's always going to be something, right? Is that you know this from every aspect of life. There's always going to be something. That doesn't mean you don't do anything about it, though. You try to fix it.
So I wanted to say, I sat through 4 days of the Silver trial. And the first day of testimony was Amy Paulin, an assemblywoman from Scarsdale, Westchester County. Amy, they asked her about her husband's stocks and what he was invested in, and she was head of the Energy Committee. He had stocks in Con Ed. She had the head of Con Ed testified before one of her hearings. You know, she didn't know, but yet she signed the form that listed this. I mean, so
where does it end?
Well, you know, how do you?
Well, when it comes to
what do you take away from that? Because she had 2 other examples of similar issues like that on her financial disclosure form.
You can deal with employment stuff the way I just described. Now, in Assemblywoman Paulin's case, that's not what happened, right? It's about her investment portfolio. So so what do you do there, right? You can't regulate everything, right? So the deal should be, and the way it's supposed to work, is if you think you have a conflict, you get advice from the Legislative Ethics Commission. And if appropriate, you recuse yourself from certain votes if you have a conflict, right? They tell you how to do it. It all falls apart because you don't have independent advice. You're asking people that you basically hire to tell you what you want to know. So we need an independent system with clear guidance on what you do about potential conflicts of interest with your investments. You recuse yourself under certain circumstances. If the voters don't like it, they get rid of you. And when it comes to outside jobs, moonlighting, AKA, you can't do it under certain circumstances. So that we think is an appropriate response, but it does hinge on independent enforcement because at the end of the day, you can have the best laws in the world. If they're not enforced, they don't matter.
Okay, so I got another takeaway for you on this that you might want to use for the upcoming session. When a leader has to appoint someone to a committee, the staff looks at the financial disclosure forms and advises the speaker, no, this person shouldn't be chair of the Energy Committee because of these issues here. So you shouldn't appoint her or him to this committee. So you should appoint this person to this other committee because there's no conflicts there. So it's up to the speaker and his staff who does the appointing that they should be more vigilant. And then it's not coming from the underlings advising, it's coming from...
But I agree with you, but again, you have the employees asking the boss to change his mind or her mind, right? So it's always very tricky. You need the independent oversight. In that particular case, though, if someone is going to chair the Energy Committee and they have outside investments, or the head of the Environmental Committee in the Assembly, and he works at a law firm that has practice that focuses in fracking, right? They make him the chair of the ENCON Committee.
Right.
There needs to be, so what do, right? If there's a conflict, someone should say, these are conflicts, and then the legislators should say to themselves, I can't do this committee. There's plenty of committees. There's like 30 committees in each house.
That's right.
And so, what's the big deal? The problem is the muscle memory in Albany is all, I can do whatever I want. It's an honor system. I'm an honorable person, therefore I can do whatever I want. And when you allow that to happen, people game the system, and if they get away with it, they continue to game the system, and you end up with Silver, right? Where he has a practice, and he figures out a way to make some money on the side and drive some state funds to somebody who's viewed as a national expert in treating mesothelioma. And then he has this side deal where the clients come back where he can make some money. He's like bringing in,
But he didn't force Dr. Taub, and Silver didn't force the Glenwood management to use the other, to send clients to Whites and Luxembourg.
Right.
Okay, they did that voluntarily, and the clients who Dr. Taub sent to Whites and Luxembourg had the ability to say, no, I don't want to use that law firm. I want to use another law firm.
We're not here to relitigate the
I'm
case,
just
right?
letting you know that's where I thought the failing was on the guilty verdict.
Well, I mean, that's legitimate. I'm sure the former speaker probably views it the same way you do, if not some other version, right? But he's convicted.
Yeah, he is.
And
I think
it should really be paused to anyone who's an elected official in New York State that is making money on the side to think about it. And certainly, if they're using their public office for private gain, they are in trouble. And so they should stop doing that, if that's what they're doing. And right now, that's what we're left with until the laws change.
Okay, I want to just change the subject for a minute because you want, one of the other topics that you deal with is education, as we talked about. And you
Big
want
head, many hats, Rabbi.
Right, and you want to freeze, and you want to freeze tuition
Yes.
at the colleges.
Yes.
Now, when I was in the University at Albany, NYPIRG also wanted to freeze
Yes.
tuition. I mean, this is deja vu all over again.
Well,
When do you, I mean...
what's the point of, in the 21st century, or in your case, 19th century?
Thank you.
What's the whole point of having, public colleges, right? It's a way for basically the mainstream of society to get the education that society thinks is a good thing, right? So it plays out in terms of the economic climate, right? You have a well-trained workforce. It helps in terms of civic life because if you have a knowledgeable, well-rounded, educated citizen, they're going to make, hopefully, more intelligent decisions on who they vote for. And so society has decided it's a good thing. You drive up the price, you make it harder for people to go. And when you do that, some people don't go. Some people end up with big debts. And so,
But let me tell you...
over the last 5 years, New York State has raised tuition by 30%. And there is no other tax that's gone up 30% in New York State. Why should the college students be the only ones that take the hit?
But do you know that it's only, at University at Albany, 15% of their budget is state funds. 15%. 85% get from private donations and from endowments. I mean, so that's
And
why
tuition.
that's why you see University at Albany, State University of New York, very small letters underneath it, and it's going to keep shrinking. State University of New York is going to keep shrinking as that percentage keeps shrinking of state funds.
There's more to the package than, if you freeze tuition, you're going to force the debate on whether or not the state should be paying more. There was a legislation that passed both houses this session that would have required the state to, part of the deal to raise tuition 5 years ago was the tuition would go up, the state would maintain its effort, not cut, and then that extra money would be used to enhance the state university system. What happened was the details of how they wrote the bill, maintenance of effort was defined as not reducing spending. So as inflation goes along, of course, you're effectively reducing if you don't raise the amount of money. And so what had happened was they were using the tuition to plug the budget hole that was left over. And so a legislation passed this year unanimously in the Assembly, one negative vote in the Assembly, one negative vote in the Senate, overwhelming bipartisan majorities, that said to define what the maintenance of effort would be to adjust for inflation and some other things. The governor vetoed it. Now, that's one way that the state could be spending more to invest in higher education, and we think that's the appropriate way to go, because you're right, the state is spending less and less, and they're just shifting the cost to families that want to go to college. Now, if you're upper middle class or wealthy, it's not that big of a deal, whatever that is, 30% increase. But if you're struggling and you're on the margin, precisely the people that need the help, they take the hit.
But when you're already at a low level of tuition, any increase is seen as a huge percentage. So for example, if you're at $5 and you want an increase to $7, that's a 40% increase. But you're only getting $2 more.
Well,
okay? But people say that it's a 40% increase.
If it would debate were over $2, Mark, I'd be with you.
You know what? But I'm just saying, once you have the lowest,
a
low base, and you keep increasing, of course you're going to have the argument, well, it's 30%, but it was so low. I mean, look at compared to private colleges and the great deal that they're getting.
Sure.
Adjust for inflation from when you went to SUNY Stony Brook, adjust for inflation to today, and do you see that there's...
There was a study I saw that looked from the 70s through the late 90s, so it's a little bit dated, which looked at at tuition in public and private schools. And it basically came down to, if my memory serves me correctly, which as I get into my 60s, it's certainly not always guaranteed that I remember everything properly. But it was essentially, the argument was that if you adjusted strictly for inflation, that you adjusted private college tuition in the 70s, and you adjusted it purely for inflation, it ends up where public college is today. So that's not just purely an inflation adjustment, right? So there's something else going on out there. The state is spending less money, pushing it out to students. You're right, that New York's tuition relative to the country is on the lower side. I'm not going to dispute that. But what is happening is people are taking on more and more debt to go to a public college. And I think now if you graduate from, on average, you graduate from one of the 4 university centers, you're looking at around 25 grand in debts, which is for you, not so much for somebody else, right?
What is that per, if you have it, and then you have a 10-year loan that you're paying $25,000 to pay off a 10-year loan? So, what is that per month? I mean, it doesn't seem like it's that onerous when you get a job and you can pay it.
The point is, what is the public policy goal of public college? The public policy goal is to let people go, is to people get that educational experience.
Rockefeller built the SUNY system so it would be free tuition. That was his aim. He wanted free tuition at all the public colleges and universities. That was what Rockefeller had when he built the system.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, that's what he wanted. And
K-12 is free.
And once they started charging, that was, they broke that ceiling.
I mean, by the way, for your viewers, this is the debate that would normally be happening at the state capitol.
Right.
Right. And it's civil, right? I mean, people have different points of view and they have reasonable differences. This is the way it's supposed to work.
Right.
Right. And so maybe we can't persuade each other. That's very possible. But I think your viewers would prefer to see this boring conversation on C-SPAN as compared to sort of the histrionics that they're exposed to when they see debates in New York and across the country. And people have differences. That doesn't mean we have to sort of kill each other over it.
Okay. So as we're running out of time, I want you to know that the viewers to know. You deal with ethics issues, in education issues, environment issues, elections issues, all the E's, health issues, like you were saying about, and you did work for the Cancer Society for a while. You deal, and then, you deal with other issues that involve government. Overall, so.
Mark, we'll have to have Blair back again over here. That's what it means.
I can't wait.
Look forward to it. Okay.
Listen, as far as I'm concerned, you're an integral part of government. Obviously, you have the 3, the executive, judicial, and legislative. But, you need a watchdog over all of them. So you're... In any case, you're the man over here, and I think to have a free society, a democratic society, you're just important, or probably even more important than some of the officials that are elected and have big names. So thank you very much for your service to the
much continued
public.
success. Yes.
Continuing with good health.